Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and no, I did not just make a doodle.
Well, that's good. Thankfully, we've been recording remotely, so if you did, it wouldn't have any effect on the rest of us. But
it would have a big effect on me.
It would, and that would be your problem. But thankfully, we don't have to deal with that. We're here at the premiere of our 16th season. Imagine that. Awesome movie year, now old enough to get a driver's license in seasons, not years. So
I hope Awesome Movie Year doesn't emancipate itself from us.
Right, that's true. Awesome Movie Year is tired of our shenanigans, the way we treat it. Never let it do what it wants.
We raised it from being a baby, much like this film. Us three men here raised this baby known as Awesome Movie Year.
Three Men in a Podcast is the new film that's coming up. We are talking in this season about the films of 1987. And we have a lot of variety coming up in this season. But as always, we begin with the number one movie at the box office. And somehow, I still don't quite understand it. The top movie at the box office in 1987 was Three Men and a Baby. What the fuck happened here, Jason?
Well, no, I mean, hey, I know you're not a fan, but I think Dave and I liked it better than you. But what's most interesting is, like, how could a comedy and basically a one-set comedy be the number one movie at a box office? I don't understand that, Josh.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. I mean, you're correct in that I did not like this movie, but my response is more what you're saying, is that how is this the type of movie in 1987, really almost in any year, even though we have different genres that are number one at the box office over the years, you know, going back to like biblical epics when we talked about 1953, I feel like you see that and you're like, oh yeah, that seems like the kind of movie that could be the number one movie. But this is a sitcom, basically.
I'm looking, and I am almost positive that this is the last film that was number one at the box office that was a comedy.
That very well could be true. I believe it. I mean, we'd have to scour. We know in the modern era, nothing like this could ever be number one at the box office.
Right. I see Shrek 2, which is IP, so I'm not counting it, but in that, you know, a little different. But as far as like a traditional comedy, I think this is it. And this was the last one. Isn't that wild?
It is wild. And I feel like it's an anomaly even in this time period. So I definitely would not have guessed before we started this season if you had asked me, what do you think is the number one movie at the box office from 1987? And given me a list of every single movie released in 1987, I don't think I would have picked this one.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, we're in a brave new world. You know, we will start to decode the themes of 1987, the year on film, as we get into this one.
We will indeed. So this movie did gross $240 million. And furthermore, it was not an expensive movie to make. It had a budget of between 11 and 15 million, according to Wikipedia. Sometimes they have these ranges here. But either way, that's a big deal. That's a huge profit for this film. And I'm sure it was a smaller budget film than a lot of other movies from 1987 that were not number one at the box office. It was also somehow the first movie from Disney to gross over $100 million on its initial release. I assume some other Disney animated movies had hit 100 million over multiple re-releases before this, but this was the first one to get there on its own initially. So what a weird ass record.
Yeah, Josh. So later in this episode, we're going to be playing a clip from my interview with James Orr, who is one of the writers of this film. And we did such a, I think, in-depth interview that we're going to release the whole interview as its own piece. But we did want to at least include some of that. And we talk about that, how Jeffrey Katzenberg was like, hey, if this thing makes $60 million, we'll consider it a success. And they like tripled that. And just this thing was like the runaway hit of the year.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's a remake of a French film from 1985 called Three Men and a Cradle, which was actually nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film in 1985. and must have been released in the US relatively extensively because every single review of this movie that I found mentioned the French film and compared this. So all of those critics had clearly seen that film and assumed that their audiences would be somewhat familiar with it. But now it's tough for us to watch. We did not track down a copy of Three Men in a Cradle to watch.
Yeah, and just as disappointing, you didn't say it in its native French.
You want me to butcher some French here? What is it?
Yeah, of course.
Trois hommes et un coffin, I think is what it is, right?
Ooh,
That's pretty good.
Thank you. Yeah,
nice.
my high school French coming in handy again here
All
on
right.
Awesome Movie Year. It was directed by Leonard Nimoy, of all people. This was the first movie that he directed outside of the Star Trek franchise. He had directed 2 Star Trek movies. And
3 and 4.
Yes, exactly. Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 4. And Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, is very comedic as far as Star Trek movies go, is the one where the crew of the Enterprise travels back in time to the 80s and are fish out of water. And there's a lot of goofy humor about these future people interacting with the modern world. So you could see how maybe someone thought he could have a flair for comedy. This was the beginning of his pretty brief career as a film director, but quite a good start here for him leaving Star Trek. But that's another one of those weird things, like, if you didn't know that and you just had to guess who directed Three Men and a Baby, I don't think most people would pick Leonard Nimoy.
Right. And we get into that in the interview as well.
I'll look forward to hearing all about that. It did win the People's Choice Award for favorite comedy motion picture. So the people loved this. That's, I think,
is that still a thing? The People's Choice Award?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't care what the people choose, so I haven't been paying attention to that.
The people are the people who listen to this show, Josh. Show the people some respect.
It's not the Awesome Movie Year audience choice poll. That I respect.
Yeah, fair enough. But yes, you're right. This thing just took over and caught everyone, men, women, children. Everyone loved this thing in 87.
Yeah, it's weird. And of course, the 3 stars, we should say, Tom Selleck, Steve Guttenberg, and Ted Danson. Tom Selleck and Ted Danson, of course, were huge TV stars at this time on Magnum PI and Cheers, respectively. But they weren't movie stars. And even Steve Guttenberg, he was probably weirdly the biggest movie star of the 3. But he was part of
Academy,
ensemble things more.
Right. And you always think of him as the Police Academy guy.
Yeah. He'd done, I think, 4 Police Academy movies at this point. And but those are big ensembles. Those are like sitcoms too.
Do you have a favorite Police Academy film?
Weirdly, I was a huge Police Academy fan when I was a kid, and I haven't seen any of them in 30 plus years. But I remember the first Police Academy was possibly the first R-rated movie I ever saw. So I think I have some affinity for that one.
Yeah, that's a good one because it's just a funny movie, but also it's Animal House at the Police Academy, right? And then they Revenge of the Nerds dumbed him down to PG and PG-13. But the raunchiness is part of the charm of the Police Academy.
Yeah, although I will say, as a kid, I think I saw that was the first R-rated movie that I ever saw, but it wasn't the first Police Academy movie that I ever saw. I started with the latest.
You had Mission to Moscow on a loop.
No, I don't know. I think by the time that one came out, I had lost interest. But I think the Police Academy 3, Citizens on Patrol, where they recruit a bunch of random weird people, that was probably my one because it was so like a cartoon or something. I'm sure it's terrible, but I
remember that one. I think it had a rap song as the theme song. It might have been the Fat Boys who did it or something.
That sounds right. I was not appreciating the comedic skills of Steve Guttenberg in those movies. I was into Michael Winslow and his sound effects, I think.
I used to work at a comedy club where Michael Winslow worked, and he was he got huge ovations. He sold out all the time. Also, we joke about it because he makes crazy sound effects, but that's a real talent that he's got there.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, I think he's great in Spaceballs, but I'm not sure in Police Academy. I feel like it was more, they don't integrate it necessarily. They're like, let's stop the movie for Michael Winslow to do some sound effects right now, but. Who knows? Maybe if I revisit the Police Academy movies, I will.
Maybe we'll get to one at some point.
I think we could. We clearly have a lot to say about them. Anyway, what's happening here? Critics actually like this movie for the most part. I found mostly positive reviews of this film, and like I said, they're pretty much all comparing it to the French movie, which was obviously a big hit in France. Again, it had been nominated for an Oscar and must have gotten a decent release in the U.S. So, starting with Roger Ebert, he said, "The movie never steps wrong as long as it focuses on the developing love between the two big men and the tiny baby. Those scenes are the heart of the movie. Unfortunately, there is also a completely unnecessary subplot to distract from the good stuff. Nimoy and his writers, James Orr and Jim Cruickshank, have remade the entire French movie, drugs and all, leading to a badly staged and distracting confrontation between the heroes and the dealers at a construction site. Why bother with all the exhausted apparatus of crime and violence recycled out of TV crime shows when the story of the men and the baby is so compelling?"
I agree with that, and I did bring that up in the interview, and James has an answer for that. Why they had to do the subplot of that.
Well, yeah, I'm curious because I assume as Ebert alludes to, it's in the original movie, so I imagine that was a part of the reason that they're being faithful.
Well, you'll have to listen to the interview.
I
Josh.
will have to. I will do that. But yes, I agree too that for whatever the reason that they include it, they should not have included it.
Definitely, that's I think the biggest criticism for me of the film, that it takes away from the relationship. Obviously, these three gentlemen have good chemistry together, right? So everything revolving around the baby and their interaction, that's really what the meat of this thing is.
Right. It's not three men and a package of heroin. That's not what you're going to see.
Maybe a Colombian remake?
Yeah. Oh boy. That's great. So yeah, the plot here, if you haven't seen,
are you upset about that because you prefer pure Pakistani and Afghani heroin? Is that why you think I should have switched the region, Josh?
Yeah, just keep talking.
Josh, drugs are a real problem.
Drugs are a real problem, as we learn from this very sophisticated film, and it's wacky mix up where the Steve Guttenberg and Tom Selleck characters are told there's a package coming, and they think the package is the baby, but it was a package of heroin that they were supposed to pass along to drug dealers. Yeah,
I get it.
I got it. Believe me.
Was one of those drug dealers Wilson from Home Improvement?
It was, yeah, Earl Hinman. He was there along with Paul Guilfoyle, who's a great character actor as the main drug dealer. So yeah, there's a lot of fun character actor appearances in this film.
Yeah, I noticed also a lot of up and coming comedians, at least three that I counted.
Yeah. I assume Colin Quinn, Dave Foley from The Kids in the Hall, and Mario Joyner. Yeah.
Those were the three. Good job, Josh.
Thank you. Yeah, I too noticed them.
Yeah.
So Janet Maslin in the New York Times, also pretty positive. She said, "Three Men and a Baby follows the French film as faithfully as it possibly can, and it too revolves around one lone idea, that there's humor in the spectacle of a grown man, heretofore ignorant of his own gentler nature, discovering that he can indeed administer formula and change diapers. The hilarity inherent in this has its limits, but it's a premise with enough timeliness and warmth to account for the first film's success. And in terms of success, this glossier, more effervescent remake will undoubtedly outstrip the original." Three Men and a Baby was directed by Leonard Nimoy, whose Star Trek direction gave little indication that he had the requisite sense of humor for this job. Happily, he does, and the film bubbles along in a funny, if predictable way, with a lot more gags than the earlier film managed.
Right. So, Josh, when I was had a hot Hollywood minute there, one of the projects that they had asked if I had a take on was a remake of Mr. Mom. And I didn't think, it took me a year to figure it out, right? Because it's all Mr. Mom's from 83, right? And it's oh, dad's at home, dad has to make dinner, dad has to change a diaper, right? And it's none of that is relevant anymore, right? So after a year, what I figured is oh, we have to reverse this whole thing. And this has to be a stay-at-home dad who has to go out into the workforce where he's never been and everything. And I finally felt oh, that's a good take on it. And then they had already sold a version of it or whatever. And I don't know if that ever got made. But I mean, this is This is like 1980s. I feel like Three Men and a Baby is like 80s horrific, right? There's so much 80s-ness going on in here. Soundtrack, wardrobe, and the premise of like dudes not being able to take care of babies, right? This isn't the first movie to do this. As we know, it's a remake, but I mean, Mr. Mom was from before that. And I think this is a theme of the 1980s.
Right. Yeah. The idea that, like, what if a man was a parent? Like, I mean, come on. I mean, as a man who is a parent, Jason, I mean, it's a little insulting, right?
I mean, I get it. It's like, look, when my ex and I split and it was like, it was me and my daughter, when I have her, right? It's just me and her, right? So it's like, you don't really have a choice. You're thrown into it and like, you just make it happen. But every parent, man or woman, learns and makes mistakes from experience, right? So look, is it comedic fodder? Sure. But look at the people we're talking about. Mr. Mom, Michael Keaton, right? Here you have Danson and Selleck, two of the biggest TV stars and very charming, and Guttenberg, who's like, again, 80s horrific movie star, right?
Right. I feel like, yeah, I mean, you're right about the 80s-ness of this movie. And I feel like maybe 1987 might be the most 80s year of the 80s.
Oh my God, that's so exciting because we have a full season to do of that.
We'll see if that idea holds up, but I feel like it might. So finally, Michael Wilmington in the Los Angeles Times said, Three Men and a Baby is an Americanization of one of the biggest recent French box office hits, Colleen Serrault's Three Men in a Cradle. Serrault's movie was fairly frothy, and this one is frothier still. Where before, much of the humor came from a woman's amused reaction to the sudden maternal problems of three definitively anti-marriage bachelors, this adaptation, written and directed by men, is more coy, more cutesy-poo, but it has the likability of the first movie. The people who made it have carried over much of the original's weightless, sweet-tempered flavor. Three Men strikes a funny chord. The audience seems to want to believe that these guys can be domesticated, but on another level, they don't want the trio broken. They want bachelor fathers, domesticated swingers.
Right. That's the whole point. If they were like ready to settle down and just be like, yeah, we should raise a kid, then there's no conflict in this movie, right?
Right. But I think the idea here is that like they can't fully settle down, right? They still have to be swinging single dudes who are also raising a baby.
There's really not that much of that, I don't think. So I think like they very early on, and I think that's one of the reasons why it was so popular. Like I'm sure thought it was too sentimental, but like these guys like kind of went all in on this. They weren't like, no, baby, you take care of yourself. Like, right away. The conflict was never like, oh, we can't take care of the baby. It was, oh, we have to take care of the baby and we don't know how.
Right. And really, they could have just hired a nanny. They had a lot of money.
Well, and they had the woman walk in, Mrs. Hathaway, who's like, if you ever need a babysitter, here. And then she gets tied up.
She does by those drug dealers. They could have just given the baby to the drug dealers. They were ready to take it.
They did give the baby to the drug dealers.
But then they're like, oh, we got to take it back. We can't let drug dealers take this baby. Like, whatever.
It's not even their baby.
Yeah. So many issues that needed to be settled here.
Yeah. So did you watch this one as a kid, Jason?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw it in the theater when I was like 7 years old. And like the rest of America, had enjoyed it. And then I even remember seeing the sequel as a kid and being like, what happened?
Yeah, the sequel is very bad. Did you watch that again?
I am a half hour through it and I'm debating watching the rest of it. I feel like I will just because I have to honor my letterbox go for Jason. I saw Dave's review where he was like, I turned it off halfway through and he gave it a star rating, but I can't do that. I need to watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
No, I finished it. It's terrible though.
It is really bad. And I did watch it recently. I don't think I'd ever seen it before. I'd seen this original as a kid and I think I liked it then, but man, did I not like it this time. And that sequel is even worse. It's just dreadful. Like whatever.
Well, yeah. And they miss all the points of what made the original successful in the sequel.
Right. There's no drug dealers. And I honestly would have been happy for the drug dealers to show up in that sequel. That's how bad it was.
Josh is pro drug dealer. You heard it here on Awesome Movie Year.
I think they should take all the babies. And So, Dave, did you see this along with the rest of America in 1987?
Absolutely. I remember seeing it with my parents when I was 7 or whatever. And I'm pretty sure that was the last time I ever had seen it until now.
Yeah. And the sequel too, or was this the first time?
That I probably just blanked it out if I did see it. I didn't remember a single thing rewatching it or watching it for the first time this week. But yeah, like I already said, it's very bad.
It is very bad. Yeah. And I was not 100% sure, but I also didn't remember a single thing from it. So I think, it was one of those things, but by the time it was 3 years later or whatever, I had lost interest along with a lot of
Yeah.
people because it didn't do as well at the box office. So, anything else you want to talk about on the background of this film, Jason?
Highest grossing remake of a French film in U.S. box office history, Josh.
Oh, that's a statistic.
There you go. Speaking of these 80-erific themes, baby boom, for keeps, immediate family, she's having a baby, look who's talking, all like how do we become a parent movies. That's just taken right from Wikipedia, or no, that's probably taken from IMDb, but like we are talking about a very 80s theme here, right?
Right, yeah, definitely. And not all of those about men either, they're definitely all just
right.
movies
Baby
about...
boom is Diane Keaton, right?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest hit, and that was mentioned in a couple reviews that I saw, where she's, the like high-powered career woman who gets stuck with a baby somehow. I forget how. I don't know.
It's Mr. Mom.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, something like that. So we'll come back in a moment and talk more of our general thoughts on Three Men and a Baby. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this premiere of our season on the films of 1987, we are talking about box office champion Three Men and a Baby. And what a champion it is, really. As we said, such a strange movie to rise to the top here. But tell me, Jason, why, how did this happen?
Josh, and later on, when you hear the clip from James Orr, I think even he is like, yeah, but none of us expected this. Like, this thing just took off like a rocket. Why did this happen, Josh? I think it was a few things. One, the three men are all charming, right? And there's an obvious chemistry there. Two, I know back in the day you would think like, oh, TV stars aren't movie stars, right? That was like the old thing. But like, Ted Danson and Tom Selleck, maybe the biggest action star on TV and maybe the biggest comedic star on TV. So they were ready to pop. Not that they hadn't done movies before. And Guttenberg obviously had already laid the track as a comedy film star. And then three, like, I mean, in a way, isn't this like a 4-quadrant movie? You could take anyone to this. The humor pop for a lot of people. And I just think it's like, it's just one of those things that caught the zeitgeist at the time. Like maybe this is like the precipice of like the how do we take care of a baby movie, right? Although Look Who's Talking was a huge hit 2 years later, right?
Yeah, and I remember loving Look Who's Talking when I was a kid too, and I'm sure it's bad, but I haven't seen it since then. Yeah.
You can't be sure it's bad, Josh. You haven't seen it since.
True. I will reserve judgment on Look Who's Talking until I never, ever see it again.
But is Look Who's Talking 2 good still?
No, that's not good.
Or the third one where the dogs talk.
Look Who's Talking Now?
That's probably actually pretty good.
The TV series that was spun off from it. What a weird-ass phenomenon that was.
Yeah, I even remember the theme song. She likes toast and butter.
Oh, God,
he likes toast and jam. Yeah. That's what mommy feeds me because I'm her little man.
It's great stuff, Jason.
Wow.
I like toasted butter.
But no, I think it's interesting what you're saying about like, oh, this is a 4-quadrant movie, because to me, like, I almost felt the opposite, because it's like, obviously I'm wrong about this, but watching this movie, it's one of these things that I'm like, who is this for? Because it's got, this whole heroine subplot. And it's got all these references to sex and whatever. It doesn't seem super like kid friendly per se, even though we have the slapsticky stuff with the guys trying to take care of the baby. But we got all that. It doesn't feel like a sophisticated, witty adult comedy that people might think, oh, it's a remake of a French movie. It must be very,
erudite.
Right. And it's not. So to me, I'm like, oh, this is a movie that really sort of fails to be for any particular audience, but in doing that, it somehow became for every audience, I guess.
Yeah, I think in the 80s, like we talk about, I always tell my daughter about all the stuff that we could do in the 80s, like growing up, that we would never do now. Like for instance, I used to play Manhunt. Do you guys know what that is?
I don't think so. I feel like that's probably some sort of gay dating site, but that's probably not what that was.
In the 80s, they didn't have any dating sites, gay or straight,
True.
Josh. So,
True.
although, did you ever get your house line mixed up with like a party line?
Did they
you
have
know,
party
the
lines in the 80s still?
Yeah, you would call and people would like chat. And sometimes how lines got crossed. So you get to hear these people like try to learn how to date each other or
I
whatever. So
don't think I ever had that experience.
Manhunt was teams hide and seek that you wouldn't play until it became dark outside, and you would play in a neighborhood. That was the course. So like literally as a child, I guess this was really the early 90s, but the 80s, I think, of course, would have counted. My parents would just let me like walk to the other side of town or walk home in the middle of the night, right? And we would be playing hide and seek in neighborhoods, hiding in backyards, running through people's houses, running through the streets. And like, it was just normal. And then it was like, oh, cool, it's midnight. I'm going to walk home alone on the street now, and it was so I think like, the point is like this movie, like you're saying, maybe it's a little more adult with the jokes, but in the 80s, like they didn't really separate like, this is for kids, this is for adults.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of movies that are clearly for kids from this era, but I mean, this seems like a movie where the intention was for it to be, like you said, the four quadrant thing for both kids and adults. That families could go to it, or adults could go to it for date night, or a parent could take their kid, and it was meant to be for all. And to me, it just feel like it would be dissatisfying for any of those demographics. But obviously, I'm wrong.
Yeah, what's interesting, like I think one of the pros is like it definitely moves. Like there's definitely you never like, oh, this pacing is off or it's slow. But I think it's so crazy because like I said, it's basically if you take out the heroine subplot, right, and you just go to like the Apatow-ish of it all, like just the stuff that takes place. It's literally like a one set movie, right? Like they built this apartment on this soundstage, and it's just like dudes hanging out with a baby, and that's like that. Imagine that now, like the number one movie is Avatar 3. The Navis have a baby and
The,
sit with it in an environmentally conscious apartment.
the Navis
Green.
do have babies, but yeah, they're a little more
It's so minor in the plot of a Avatar,
true.
Josh.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you're right. There is very little. I mean, and that maybe I don't know what your interview revealed, but that maybe to me is like, well, maybe the one of the reasons that they left that drug subplot in is because they needed some sort of
Yep.
action,
Had to get him out of the
right,
apartment.
exactly. Give them something to do and even some like suspense and danger or whatever. And you get Ted Danson to dress up as a woman for no reason and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, most of it and any of the stuff that we're gonna care about. I mean, I think even positive responses to this movie are always saying, well, but the drug subplot is stupid and worthless. So
Yeah, but that's okay. Like we know there's plenty of movies that do that even to this day, like add on an unnecessary subplot.
true. And it's always bad. But what I'm saying is that the parts of the movie that people enjoy, you're right. They're all just in this one set, this one environment with just three characters and the baby doing goofy stuff. And that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I like that. They have like, we talked about this when we were, I think, doing So I Married an Axe Murderer or Wayne's World, and we talked about So I Married an Axe Murderer. They have like this amazing apartment, right? And obviously, two of the three are successful, right? So it's interesting that they're just like broing down at this apartment, but it's like, I'm an architect, I'm a satirist, and then like I'm an actor, like, very like, movie job stuff right
Right.
there. I think like the other thing, like we said, is like there's a chemistry between these three that like people really responded to.
Yeah, they do have chemistry, which is why it's also frustrating that Ted Danson's character disappears for like the entire middle of the movie. And I mean, it's driven by the plot. He has to be gone and unable to be reached so that we can have this mix up about the baby and the package of heroin. And so it's Tom Selleck and Steve Guttenberg can think, oh, yeah, the baby is supposed to be here and it's going to be picked up or whatever. But it does lose the chemistry. I mean, you have it at the beginning when they're throwing a party and they're all the swinging bachelors and you can see how they're friends. And then he's gone for so long and then he finally returns and, then it's the three of them raising the baby. But for a lot of the movie, it's just the two of them. And I feel like, you're losing some of that chemistry.
I understand that, but I mean, obviously, that then the focus is really like on the baby and like how they interact with the baby. You mentioned Ted Danson. To me, that was the best performance in the movie. Like, I thought he's obviously so likable, but I thought there was a real sweetness to him, and like I was like, man, this dude is an American treasure, obviously, but like he could have been a big movie star. I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I like Ted Danson a lot. I mean, he is an American treasure, and looking at just how many iconic TV roles he's had is kind of amazing, or just brilliant performances, long running performances.
Yeah.
A lot, and he's good. I feel like the thing about him in this movie is like if you've watched Cheers, which was what he was doing mainly at the time, you would expect this kind of performance from him. And a lot of the reviews singled out Tom Selleck because he was Magnum PI and this was a departure for him. And he's good in it too. I mean, they're all charismatic. I don't enjoy the movie. I didn't like the characters per se, but I can't deny that these performers have charisma.
Making your way in the world today takes everything you got.
Jason's just going to keep singing theme songs throughout this.
Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot.
You can stop anytime.
Wouldn't you like to get away?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for that.
All right. Josh, it's 2023 at the time of recording. We had some raunchy comedies in the box office this summer. Do you think a movie like this will ever come back and be a box office hit?
No, I mean, well, first of all, this movie is not raunchy.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I'm just clarifying. We haven't seen like a comedy like this in the box office.
No, we haven't. I mean, again, this is like a sitcom, basically. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure if I did some research, I could find a movie that is similar to this that was released in theaters recently and, kind of guess at whether that kind of movie could succeed. But I feel like not really, that there's movies that are released that are very much for kids. And there are those raunchy comedies coming back, as you said, that we've had recently, like No Hard Feelings and Joyride, that have had kind of mixed success. And I think maybe those will continue to be attempted, whether they'll become huge or not. But certainly not number one at the box office. I mean, we'd have to have a really like seismic shift in movie-going habits, I think, for the number one movie at the box office in any year going forward to not be some sort of giant franchise action blockbuster.
This is a streaming piece at this point in time.
Right. And as we, we'll probably mention later, when there was talk of a remake for this film, which seems to be kind of stalled, it was going to be a Disney Plus original. And that absolutely seems like the place for something like this at this point.
I suggested to James, you remake this with women as the leads now. And one's like a career woman and one's like a party girl. And the other one maybe just has no ability to interact with children. I don't know, whatever. But I think you could do something and change it around. And, obviously if you updated it, it wouldn't be just three white dudes at this point in time.
Right. No, it wouldn't. But I still think this is a premise that no matter how you shift it is pretty creaky. And I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of appeal to it anymore.
I think so. I mean, that's like I said with the Mr. Mom thing. It was already like, well, this has had its time and it's not there anymore. But that's cool. Like, I mean, this captures 1987.
It sure does. So did you have any like favorite moments of this?
Did I have any favorite moments? I you were talking about the beginning before the baby. And I think when you see those three interacting in that like very like yuppie-ish 80s party, that was a lot of fun, So I thought, just getting into it was a fun bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's so belabored and I just found it so annoying. And it's one of these movies where it's like, these people just talk to each other in a straightforward manner. They could solve this problem, or even not. Like the fact that they are clearly so wealthy and they never even think to like hire some help because they don't know how to take care of this baby. And I mean, just all of it, I just found so grating. Everything about it, the soundtrack, the drug dealers, the baby itself, I hate babies, and a movie full of a crying baby, I just am like, that's
No.
why.
Well, at least you didn't trash the baby's performance.
No, the baby is perfectly acceptable as twin girls. I forget their names, but they did not go on to have a large film career.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But Josh, I'm glad you brought up the music. Marvin Hamlish, it felt like very Beverly Hills Cop inspired, right? And I still remember, that song Bad Boy from the Miami Sound Machine, that is an 80s classic to start. So you're watching the beginning and you have this very 80s song and you see these like montage of like these guys, and Steve Guttenberg is like painting caricatures on the wall, and you're like, as you said, this might be the most 80s thing possible at this point in time.
Yeah, so. That opening montage is insane. And their apartment is insane. If you walked into that apartment in real life, you would be like, these guys are deranged.
Hey, it's the 80s. Anything goes. It's all over the top, and you can just really showcase your flair.
I guess so. It's too much flair for me.
All right. I have a question here. As you know, I like the alternate casting, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you choose one actor from each of these lists to alternate cast it. Okay.
Okay.
So, all right. And Dave, you can do this too. So Michael, who was played by Steve Guttenberg, right? Rick Moranis turned the role down. And the other names that were bandied about were Tom Hanks, John Travolta, Bruce Willis, and Michael Keaton.
I would love to have seen Rick Moranis. He would have brought a kind of weirder sensibility to this. So that would have been fun.
Dave, who do you take?
I'd say either Rick Moranis or Bruce Willis. That would be interesting.
And what's so funny is like Bruce Willis was the voice of the baby in Look Who's Talking.
Right.
John Travolta was the star. Michael Keaton was Mr. Mom. So you basically, and Tom Hanks, I guess you could go with Bachelor Party, but Tom Hanks could do anything. I think Michael Keaton could do anything. Rick Moranis would have been fun. I agree. So, okay, Jack, our Ted Danson character. There's a lot of names on this one. Michael J. Fox, Tony Danza, Jeff Daniels, Danny Glover, John Hurd, Kevin Kline, Gary Oldman, Bill Pullman, Dennis Quaid.
Yeah, I'm sure someone like Dennis Quaid would have been, he's got that kind of all-American quality, which Ted Danson also brings to it, and that's probably what they were looking for. But I just want to see what the hell Gary Oldman would have done in that role. I want to see that. I just want to make it weirder. I want Rick Moranis and Gary Oldman, and who knows who the third one will be.
Yeah.
It's just going to be like a weird-ass movie, and then Nimoy is going to put them all on the Enterprise or something.
Yeah, I think for me, like Danny Glover pops because like it would be nice to have someone else in there, and Danny Glover so good at like those kind of straight man things in the 80s. But also, I think for this character, it wouldn't have been what we know as Danny Glover because Jack was like the ladies' man. I think Kevin Kline could have done it. He's so charming and everything.
Sure, yeah. I think like Dennis Quaid, he'd have that kind of more all-American feel to him.
Dave, who are you picking?
I actually think Danny Glover would be fun. It would be fun to see him like confused by a baby.
That would be fun.
The baby, when he has to change the diaper, he could say, "I'm getting too old for this shit."
Yeah.
There you go.
Hey,
there you go.
Boom, you nailed it.
Yeah,
and Peter, Josh, played by Tom Selleck. The word on the street is it was turned down by Paul Hogan, Crocodile Dundee, which I think would have worked for what you're going for, Josh.
I don't even need to hear the rest of the list. That's what I want.
Yeah, Paul Hogan, of course, not able to ever do anything but play Crocodile Dundee. That would have been a disaster, but maybe an interesting disaster.
That's not a baby. This is a baby.
We got to get to Crocodile Dundee someday too, right?
Oh,
I think so. On. But Dave, you're right to not even consider the rest of these bums on this list. Steve Martin, Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jack Nicholson.
They just wanted everybody, huh?
Yeah, just definitely a different flavor to that.
I mean, it's got to be, if you're looking at the chemistry and the dynamics of this time period, it says Steve Martin or Chevy Chase in this one, right?
Right. I mean, you cast Schwarzenegger or Nicholson, and they're just going to like completely
take over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think Bill Murray is such a comic, like he's his own rocket, he's his own comet. Like, I think he's just so funny. You got to have the focus on him all the time. So,
yeah. No, I mean, I think as much as I didn't like this movie, I do think the casting works. And in part because it's got these two big TV stars who are able to branch out and people clearly wanted to see them do something different. And so that was the right choice and these guys have chemistry with each other. I just find the whole plot, the baby part and the drug part, so tedious, so annoying. The characters are annoying. They're not people I want to hang out with or spend time with. Everything is so annoyingly contrived. Just, I don't know. I didn't care about any of it. Should we mention the mother who shows up at the end and sadly has a much larger role in the sequel?
Nancy Travis. She's fine. I mean, there's really, you have to bring the mom in and they do a nice job of like, hey, we still want to hang out with this baby and like, let's all move in together. That nice 80s thing. That's all I need to mention about that, Josh.
Yeah, Nancy Travis is a perfectly fine actor, but she's not the best
miscast
British accent either.
Right, I agree. Why not just get a British actress?
Exactly. I don't know.
Josh, let's rate this thing out of 5 doodles in a diaper.
Jason loves the doodles.
They make a lot of jokes about the baby pooping.
They sure do. They sure do.
Yeah. This gets 3 diaper doodles from me, Josh. It's fun. It's easy. I totally hear all your criticisms. It's just a fun 80s movie. 3. You can sit down and watch it.
I give it 2 doodles, and I would say, even if like me, you remember kind of having affinity for this as a child, don't. Just leave it there. Don't watch it again. 2 doodles for me. Dave?
Yeah, 3 doodles from me. But I'll also say probably don't watch it. I mean, let it stay in your memory from the 80s,
No, man, watch it. This is like an 80s timepiece.
Yeah, it sure is. But hopefully we'll have some better representations for the poor 80s as we go on. But we'll come back. First, we'll get to hear some of Jason's chat with James Orr. And then we'll come back and talk about the legacy of Three Men and a Baby.
All right, welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. It's Jason. I am here with the esteemed co-writer of Three Men and a Baby, James Orr, who is not only a big-time screenwriter, but also a filmmaker, a wine connoisseur, a cigar aficionado, a man of many interests. How are you, James?
I'm very well, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Of course. James, this was probably the biggest movie you ever did, right?
In terms of box office, yeah, it was the biggest box office movie of 1987 domestically. You'd have to do the inflationary math on it, but I think it made in 1987 it made about $170 million domestic. That translates, I don't know, to $500 million today, but so it was a big deal. And what the funny thing about that, by the way, is when it started as a project at Disney, and if you want to get into that, it's a fascinating story about how Jeffrey Katzenberg bought the rights to the original French film and everything else that followed. When it originally started, it was seen by the studio as a very small little remake of a French film. It wasn't seen as we're going to make a fortune on this movie. And the budget of it was extremely low relative to other movies at the time. And essentially, if you look at the way they cast the movie, really it was cast with TV stars. Tom Selleck and Ted Danson are TV stars, and Steve Guttenberg was a police academy guy. It's not like they went large in any way. So the success of the movie was an enormous surprise to the studio and everyone else.
I do want to know that story. I did have one question for you first, which is, this is 1987. As far as your filmography, it looks like you were pretty much 1985 on. So this is relatively early in your career. What is that like to hit that rocket ship so early? Were you ready for it?
Not really. As I said, the whole thing was a surprise to everyone involved, including me. And I can go through the beginning to the end of it in terms of getting it made. I mean, it was hard to get it made because there were so many complications. And the original director, Colleen Serrault, who directed the French film, was part of the production in the beginning, and we worked with her for a long time. And then she fell out under mysterious circumstances, by the way. And as a result of that, the movie was half. It's funny. She had already done building the set. That apartment in the movie was a set. It was shot in Toronto, so it was built on a stage in Toronto. And she'd done all this pre-production work. Now she leaves, goes back to France. Jeffrey Katzenberg was happy because she was, a challenging creative partner. She was French, and she didn't know anything about American film. And I got to tell you about who she wanted to star in the movie before it was the guys who were in the movie. It's kind of bizarre how that happened. But when she left, Katzenberg called us and said, well, she's gone, and now we have to find a director, and the script isn't finished. So you have to go and have lunch with 10 directors in town and tell them what you're writing and how it's going to turn out, because there was nothing to show them. So that was an obstacle. But the other obstacle was, in general, directors in Hollywood don't like to take over other directors' movies. They just don't like to do it because it looks like they're just journeymen who came in and fixed things. So we had literally 10 lunches over maybe a week or more, obviously. And we're talking some of the biggest directors in town, including, I remember, never forget the lunch with Arthur Hiller, who would have been a lovely choice for the movie. But none of them really wanted to take someone else's work on and finish it. So it was a big obstacle. So it looked like we couldn't find a director. I mean, it could have all collapsed. And then here's the punchline of the funny story. It's not looking good. And we're still working on the script. And then one late afternoon, Katzenberg calls and says, I have a director. He's on the fence, but I think we can get him over. You have to go and you have to deliver on this. And I said, fine, we've been doing it for 10 or so people. Who is it? Katzenberg said, Leonard Nimoy. And I took a pause and I said, Jeffrey, Leonard isn't funny. Are you sure? And he said, well, we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel. No one wants to take this movie. So we have to make this move. So I said, fine, what do we have to do? He said, we got to go where he is, and you got to convince him, and you got to bring it home. You got to knock it out. I said, fine, where is he? He said, well, he's in Odessa, Texas at a Star Trek convention. So we flew to Odessa, Texas. It was me, my writing partner, and the producer, Robert Ford. It was going to be an in and out, come in the morning, have the meeting, and then fly out the same day. So we go to the Hilton at the airport in Odessa, Texas, go into a very small ballroom, sit at the end of the table waiting for Leonard Nimoy to come in so I can pitch him the story. Because again, the script's not done. So it's all going to come out of my mouth. So we're waiting. And of course, Leonard Nimoy is Leonard Nimoy. I mean, I grew up on Star Trek and his voice is indelibly etched in my head. And I have great regard for him as an actor. So in walks Leonard. And now, I've done a lot of pitches in my life, and you can kind of read the room and the person you're pitching to. And you can tell by body language where they are. Are they receptive? Are they enthusiastic? Or are they going through the motions? So I could tell right away he was in resistance mode. And I could tell because he walked in at the other end of the table. He did not sit down. He just stood. We're all sitting. He stood and said, okay, what do you got? Now, this is not a good way to start a meeting. It really isn't. So I realized, okay, here's a show coming. So I pitched the story we're writing. And he's still standing. He's still listening. Get to the end of the pitch, and he's still looking, and I can tell I haven't gotten him yet. I didn't get him. And the pitch is over, the story pitch is over, and then I came up with this punchline tagline. I said, Leonard, this is a story about 3 arrested adolescents who are determined to be children for their entire life until they come face to face with a real child, and then they become adults. And his eyes lit up, literally lit up. And he pointed at me and he said, I know what that's about. And he walked out. So we're looking at each other. I think that went okay. We come back to Los Angeles. It's now nighttime because of the flights and stuff. I think 9:00. I get a call from Jeffrey and he said, you did it. He's in. And that's how Leonard Nimoy ended up directing the movie.
That's a cool story. Where you worked through the production? Were you on set? Were you kind of producing as well at this point? Or
no, we weren't producing, but it was because of the way the movie it came together. It was almost done like a stage play in the sense that, there was a first draft, and then the set had already been built for this $1 million set of the apartment. And so we were writing, it was literally like Broadway. We were writing scenes on one day, slipping them under the door of everybody involved, and then getting notes the next day as they were, 2 days ahead. It was really kind of overlapped like that. And frankly, I'm glad you brought this up because it was so hodgepodged together that when it was over, the production was over and we went back to Los Angeles, I kind of was thinking, man, this is not exactly the best way to make a movie. Everything was kind of overlapped. double tagged and stuff. And I thought, hopefully it'll work out. And then we went on to another project. And then, as you well know, post-production can take as long, if not longer, as the production of the movie. So jump ahead maybe 4 or 5 months till they have a rough cut. And we get a call, and we're on to another project. And we got a call saying, we're testing the movie down in Orange County. Why don't you guys come down for the test? So we went down, and I had very low expectations. I said, oh, hopefully it'll be nice. And saw the test, and the test was literally through the roof. I've never seen anything like it. And I remember turning to my partner saying, this might be the biggest movie we ever do, based on that one test.
You had a feeling just from...
Oh, there was no question. It was clear. I mean, people jumped to their feet and applauded at the end. I've seen a lot of tests in my career, some good, some bad, some somewhere in the middle, but this was really spectacular response. And the studio also was clearly aware that we got something on our hands. So it went from this kind of small, bizarrely made movie where the original director fell away and we couldn't find another director and blah, 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 to, my God, this is going to make money. Did we think it was going to make $180 million? No. I remember Katzenberg saying, we'll be happy if it makes 60. Well, it made 3 times that. And so it was just like, what the hell is happening here?
You were Barbie before Barbie was Barbie, James.
I'm going to take that and use it. I'm going to tell all my friends, fuck Barbie, I'm the original Barbie. I don't care what you say.
Ted Danson.
I'll have to start wearing pink.
I was going to say, Ted Danson could have pulled off pink in that movie. We know that. So
yeah, actually, he could have. He could have.
Well, so with 3 Men and a Baby, you said, we're talking bigger TV stars. You said Celine who did she want to cast when you had mentioned that?
Oh, okay. This is one of my favorite stories of the movie, and there's a bunch of other ones too. This is truly my favorite. So when Colleen was on the movie, she was a French Marxist feminist. So she didn't understand the studio system, and she didn't understand American culture, because none of that works in America, and it certainly doesn't work with Jeffrey Katzenberg at a $1 trillion studio. So she didn't get any of it. And when she came over, because she was part of the package, they couldn't buy the movie without her, because she owned it. She didn't know any American stars, none. So for, I think, 6 months, every day at the studio, they would show her movies of the reigning male stars in America so she could get a sense of them. And she watched all the important movies with all the important actors for 6 months every day studiously. And finally, we were hired already to start taking the original movie and Americanizing it. And so she said, I've decided who I know the 3 best actors in America. So everybody's excited. Jeffrey calls us in. We're sitting in a meeting with the producer and Colleen, and we're waiting for her to announce her choices. And this is a very thoughtful group of guys. I mean, Jeffrey Katzenberg was in his own way a genius of an executive. He really was incredibly smart guy. And she says, in a real broken English, she says, the 3 greatest actors in America, and I want them to play the 3 men, are Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci.
Oh, yeah.
So now there was a deafening silence as everyone tried to process what she just said. And so, of course, there was a silence, and I was compelled to fill it. So I jumped in and I said, Colleen, if you cast those 3 men, we'll have to change the name of the movie to 3 Men Eat a Baby. And, of course, that broke the tension. And she was kind of not amused by that joke, by the way. She was determined these were the 3 men. Now, Jeffrey went into, not in the room, but afterwards, he went into panic mode, going, this is impossible. We can't make the movie with those guys. It's not going to work. Which is one of the reasons why there was a mysterious something behind the scenes that I still am not clear about that forced her to resign from the movie. And the minute she resigned, it was Jeffrey who cast those 3 guys. Selleck, Danson, and Guttenberg. It wasn't the director, it wasn't Leonard. They were already on the movie when Leonard came on. Those 3 guys were picked by Jeffrey. So
she was just casting Kill the Irishman, 25 years ahead of time, or 30 years ahead of time.
Exactly. So. Exactly. But, we all knew that this was a lighthearted comedy, but all of a sudden, this is not a lighthearted comedy anymore.
I know. I love that, the confrontation scene in Heat where they're in the diner together, and that would just be great to be like, if she makes another doodle, I will take you out. So now were you brought into this project because of what you had already established with your working relationship with Disney?
Yes. Here's the lead up to that. We had written Tough Guys. It got made, and then in '86 they wanted to do a sequel to Splash. Remember Splash? Yeah. So we wrote the sequel to Splash, and they almost made it, except Ron Howard only wanted to produce it. He didn't want to direct it, and Tom Hanks said, "I'll only do it if Ron directs it." And Ron said, "No, I got another movie I'm working on. I'll just produce it." And Tom said, "Well, no." So they didn't make the movie, but they wanted to. It was greenlit, and so we had delivered on Tough Guys. We had delivered on Splash 2. The tale continued.
Heyo.
And that's how I sold the movie. Sold it, by the way, is on that tagline. And so now Jeffrey's kind of like going, "Oh yeah, James and Jim are fabulous writers, blah blah, all that stuff." And then he called on one day and said, "I bought this little movie from France. It's small, and have you seen it?" And I said, "It was called 3 Men in a Cradle." And I said, "No, we haven't seen it." He said, "Well, it's playing at an art house in Santa Monica. Why don't you guys go down and see the movie and we'll talk?" We didn't even know it existed. So we go down to this little art house on Santa Monica Boulevard in Santa Monica or West LA. And we saw the movie. And I thought, wow, this is a lovely movie, full of heart, full of emotion, full of great human ideas. And I thought, yeah, this would make a great remake. So went back to the office and called Jeffrey and said, "Yeah, we're in. It's a great movie." He said, "Yeah, I don't know. It's a little movie. Maybe, it didn't cost us a lot of money to get the rights." He said, "The only problem is that we have to use the same director because that's part of the deal. And she's French and you guys are Canadian. So she probably will like you because she doesn't like Americans." I mean, you're literally telling me this. He said, "She doesn't really like Americans. She doesn't like Americans. She's a Marxist. But you're Canadian and I was born in Quebec." And she's like, "All that stuff will appeal to her." And so that's how we got onto the project and worked with Colleen for, it must have been 4 or 5 months before she bailed.
So we were trying to track down the original. You can't find it anywhere. What did you modify to take it from a French art film to a massive American hamburger hit?
Well, because, as I said, Colleen was truly a Marxist feminist. And a large part of the original movie, kind of let's call it, for the sake of argument, the subplot of the movie, was very political. It was like hardcore politics and about women and motherhood. And I mean, it was just like, what? It didn't even, to me, belong in the movie. I mean, the idea of 3 men managing something like a 6-month-old baby is in itself inherently charming. In fact, we got ripped off with Full House. Full House was a ripoff of 3 Men.
Right.
Totally. And Jeff Franklin, who I know, after the movie, that show was a fabulous success, told me to my face. He said, "I really owe you some residuals because you ripped the fucking idea off and you didn't pay for it." And he goes, "Yeah, we did." So it's inherently amusing and rich for storytelling. So we took that subplot of the politics out, obviously, because that wouldn't work here. And then we enhanced this idea that I pitched to Leonard, which is it was the Peter Pan principle, which is, all men never want to grow up and they want to stay adolescents forever. They're perpetually 19. And then things happen in their life that turn them into adults. And having a child normally via marriage and all that stuff, by the way, Jason, you could absolutely identify with this because that changed your life. I remember our conversations about your daughter. And so I took this idea that these 3 coolster guys who just live in a pinball, because that's how we just described the set. The apartment was a frat house. It was paintings on the wall and games and toys. It was just, they're not going to grow up. It was a big playpen. And so you introduce a vulnerable female baby, Mary, her name was Mary, into the mix, and it's going to be funny, but it's also going to be an evolving story about how these men kind of grow up. We certainly enhanced that because that's an American phenomenon like no other. And I also thought it was an easy thing for an audience to instinctually understand without hammering it on the head. But every woman knows that every woman treats men like they're boys, and every woman tends to mother everything, and so we thought, well, this is universal, and it's America. So we kind of enhanced that and straightened out the subplot, and it just made it kind of a romp rather than anything, political statement.
When I was watching, I thought, there's always rumors of a reboot of it, right? So I thought today they would probably lose the crime subplot of it and just focus in on kind of what's going on with the three men, their interactions with each other and the baby. What do you think?
I think you're probably right. I mean, the subplot was, I hate to say this, it was taken before taken. I mean, it was, protect the baby, don't get the baby in trouble. Oh my God, we lost the baby. It's, it's that kind of, or like Raising Arizona. Remember they did the whole thing. Well, we lost the baby. It's on top of the car. It's like same game, same dynamic. And it's all, that stuff is always kind of a bit of a throwaway and a little cartoony, but we needed a subplot. Because otherwise the whole movie would have been in this one set and it was going to get claustrophobic. It's already fairly claustrophobic. So getting it out was important for us and for the studio, frankly. But yeah, they made a sequel, they made a sequel called 3 Minute Old Lady.
Right.
And which was not a success because the reason we didn't do it is because they changed the whole premise of the movie and that because Selleck said, I want the movie to be about me. Because he knew the first movie wasn't about him. It was about the baby. So he said, no, I want it to be about me. And so I want to marry the baby's mother. And it's like, well, that's not what the movie is. We pitched 3 stages of this girl's evolution as a girl. So they had her as a baby. She's now, an adolescent, 10 to 12, when she's becoming a woman, was our sequel. And then the third one, because we were going to do a third, was when she leaves home and goes to college and leaves the 3 fathers. So we built it out into 3 episodes, and I say episodes because it's kind of like a sitcom, 3 movies. And we pitched it to the studio that this is what it should be. It's all focused on her. It's focused on her. Follow her evolution. And then Jeffrey said, James, you're right. That's the way it should go. But Selleck won't do the movie unless it's about him. So then we said, we don't want to do that movie. It's not going to work. You're going to fail. And so we withdrew. Sure enough, failed.
But you keep mentioning Katzenberg. It sounds like you had a pretty good working relationship with him.
I had a very good working relationship with Jeffrey. And Jeffrey was a perpetually impressive executive, I think. And I worked with a lot of famous executives, including Aaron Spelling and Brandon Tartikoff. I mean, some of the legendary executives, all of whom, by the way, had their own enormous gifts. But very few, if any, are as impressive as Jeffrey Katzenberg. His ability to handle talent and to nurture talent. This talent's always vulnerable and fragile, even if they act tough. And usually they do act tough, but it's an act. And he just knew how to get the best out of you and create in an environment in which you could thrive. He was just brilliant. He really was.
Did you cast the ghost, James? What?
Well, as I said earlier, the movie was shot on a stage, so this whole idea of a New York apartment is nonsense. That was a stage in Toronto, wasn't even near New York. And what that was is, you might recall that Ted Danson plays kind of a low-level actor who's, fighting for parts on soap operas and commercials. So one of the props in the movie was a cardboard cutout of Tom Selleck holding a product for a commercial. You know what I mean? That you would put in a store, for some kind of laxative or something. And it was a picture of him, and it was full size
of Ted Danson, right?
Ted Danson, the actor in the movie, playing that character, like one of his gigs. And it was just leaned up in the back of the set, and it threw a silhouette. Just the top of it threw a silhouette, which became the big story about the ghost. So that was what that was, and nothing more. I wish I could tell you that there was something creepy going on, but A, it wasn't in New York. B, it wasn't a real apartment, and C, it was a prop.
Hey man, word of mouth, right? It keeps helping the
still to this day, I get questions about it. Still to this day,
yeah.
I didn't. By the way, the orders on the at the time DVD and VHS went through the roof when that happened.
Right.
It was a ka-ching moment.
There you go. And what a good time to have that with DVDs and VHS.
When you could do
right. Well, thank you, James, for doing this. What are you got anything you want to pitch now? What are you up to nowadays?
Well, I'm formally retired. We should do a show on how Hollywood has changed in the last 30 years, because it's changed. The business has changed. The energy has changed. The rules have changed. This is why there's a huge strike going on with the actors and the writers, because the changes are monumental, probably bigger than anything since maybe the coming of sound and television. So it's not the business I got into in the 70s, 80s, and frankly, I kind of lost interest in it. So now the only thing that I do that's film making is I still make documentaries on things that I like, as you pointed out, wine, cigar, things like that. I mean, if I'm interested in a topic and I have some passion for it, it's easy for me to put it on video, and I enjoy it. It doesn't pay a lot of money, but that's not why you're doing it. So I still do documentaries.
James, last question for you. There's always rumors of this reboot of Three Men and a Baby. Would you reboot it today with the same way, with three bachelors, or would it be like maybe three party girls that have never had that experience? How would you tackle this today?
Well, today, given how things have changed, I think that idea you just threw out, which is it's funny, you couldn't have pitched this back in the 80s, but you can now because of the way things have happened. There are a lot of young women, Gen Zers and millennials, who have decided they don't want to have children. Lots of them. So it would be very interesting to get three of those kinds of independent party girls who don't want to procreate because the world is too awful a place to procreate, or whatever else excuse they have. And then all of a sudden a child comes into their life and their motherhood blossoms, and they change and realize, oh my God, this is the greatest gift of all time. That would be an interesting movie. And given the politics and the cultural politics of the day, that would be really, really fitting as opposed to three white men,
right,
and a baby.
But I think with the women, you could do it because one is just career obsessed, and one's just still living in her 20s lifestyle. I don't know.
All of that. One had a bad family so she said, I never want to do that. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could do.
Yeah.
But it would be very contemporary, because a lot of women are going through the period, particularly in the mid-30s, which is the time that those decisions often get made. And they're saying, no, I got a career, and I want to be independent, and I got a dog. That's enough. I've heard this so many times in my life. So, no, I got a dog. I don't need a baby. A dog is my baby. I mean, how many times and they're carrying their dogs around all the time. So it would be fabulous, because at least two of the three women would have a pet. And then all of a sudden you'd see the baby take over their life, and the pet's sitting in the corner looking at them, wondering they're not getting any attention anymore because they were replaced by this bundle of joy. I mean, there's all kinds of cultural truths you could have fun with.
I think so. You could mix it up. It could be two women and a man, whatever it is. But yeah. So, James, as always, good chatting with you. Thanks. This was really insightful. This is a cool interview, and thanks a lot, James.
Thank you, guys. Talk to you soon.
All right, we're back here on Awesome Movie Year. Thanks to James Orr. I mean, this guy just really took us through the entire project, and he was there at this boom time in Hollywood where everything was just cracking. And I really like those stories. I know he's got a lot more, so maybe we'll get more Orr going forward, Josh. But if you want to hear more Orr right now, at the Buy David Rosen Patreon, where Dave bilks us out of all of our money, we are putting up the entire 45-minute interview that I did with James Orr. And I think there's a lot of just meat on that about this film, about working in Hollywood in the 80s, and about working with a lot of legends. So a lot of Jeffrey Katzenberg stories, a lot of stories about Leonard Nimoy and the cast. So definitely this is worth a listen.
But how many doodles?
No doodles, Josh. No doodles. Legacy of this movie, I think, Josh, we know we're talking about babies and baby projects. As James mentions in the interview, Jeff Franklin admitted to him that Full House was basically ripped off from this. We had My Two Dads. We had all these baby movies. Babies, movies, parents who don't know how to parent, hot commodity in the 80s. Huh, Josh?
Yeah, I definitely thought of Full House, which is not officially an adaptation of this, but, as you said, is clearly heavily influenced by it, as well as My Two Dads. And there is, of course, the sequel, as we mentioned, Three Men and a Little Lady, which came out in 1990 when Mary, the baby, is now 5 years old, and the mother, Sylvia, played by Nancy Travis, is going to get married, but Tom Selleck is in love with her, and they travel to England, and it's very, very, very bad. And it loses whatever might have been charming about the original movie. There are no drug dealers in it whatsoever. And do not, even if you liked the first one, don't watch it. It's very bad.
It's not a good film. And in that interview with James, he goes into a lot of the problems that we all agree were the reasons why it fell off.
Yeah, and it did not do as well, certainly at the box office. There was a brief effort to possibly do a third movie in 2010, which would have been called Three Men and a Bride. Maybe a sort of, father of the bride riff with these guys and a grown up Mary getting married, but that did not come to fruition. And it was also, the French film was remade a bunch of times in India in like 6 different Indian languages over the course of a number of years.
Now, that's what we should do, is watch all of them and compare them.
Yeah, I don't know if any of those are available here in the US, but you can see how this would be a durable premise. It's kind of broad and obvious, and you could translate it to a bunch of different cultures.
Because, Josh, in every culture, there are babies.
And there are men.
Except in the Shaker culture, right? Because the whole thing was they weren't going to procreate anymore.
I guess so. So that is the one place where you can't remake this film.
So
they just watched this movie with a blank stare the whole time.
I don't even know if they're around anymore, the Shakers. So,
So many things to investigate here after we finish recording. So.
Josh, there was, as you mentioned, Disney Plus. Zac Efron was going to be the lead, right? And so you got Zac Efron, maybe you got Camille Nanjiani, and let's cast this third member today, huh?
I don't know. I feel like Kumail Nanjiani can do better than this.
I feel like you don't know how this project's going to go, so I'm going to cast it, Josh.
Okay.
This feels like Zach Galifianakis.
I'm going to go Craig Robinson.
Ooh,
yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see that. Hopefully that won't ever happen, actually. It's been stalled for like 3 years, so we're going to hope it just dies off.
I still think my idea of 3 women and a baby would be a good one today.
It could work. But I was interested to read this sitcom called Baby Daddy from, I don't know, like 5 to 10 years ago or whatever, was technically like an adaptation of this, because I remember reviewing that show when it first premiered, and it's awful. It's way worse than this movie, but also it's not 3 men and a baby. It's like 1 man and a baby. I can't see how they would have had to actually like license the rights to this movie in order to make that, but apparently they did. And it lasted somehow for 6 seasons.
That might not be good, but the kind of novelty hip hop song, Who Dat Is, That Just My Baby Dad, that's a good one.
Was that recapping the plot of 3 Men and a Baby?
Between that and Bad Boy, we've really hit the musical marks today, Josh.
We sure have. The French film had its own sequel. It did not have a 3 Men and a Little Lady type sequel. That was fully invented for the American market. Instead, its sequel came much later in 2003. It was called 3 Men in a Cradle 18 years later. And the child there was now a teenager taking exams. And it sounds like it's not very good, at least according to like Letterboxd responses, even from people who liked the first one. But clearly that movie is also kind of a beloved entity in French pop culture as well.
Josh, the exec producers, Ted Field and Robert W. Court, huge, major producing team, Revenge of the Nerds, all the Bill and Ted movies, Jumanji, and Ted Field co-founded Interscope Records.
Hey, yeah, that's
with
impressive.
Jimmy Iovine.
Yeah. As I said, this was kind of a breakout, or it seemed like it would be, for Leonard Nimoy as a major director. That didn't really work out too well. He directed 3 more movies, none of which I had heard of. And the last one of those was in 1994. And then he kind of gave up on directing and went back just to acting, mostly in Star Trek projects, and never directed another Star Trek project either, which was kind of strange to me. So I'm not sure why he kind of abandoned that aspect of his career. A lot of Star Trek actors have, kind of used that as a platform to work as directors, especially in TV and especially in directing Star Trek TV episodes, for example. But that it seems like Nimoy kind of went for it and then gave up on it.
Well, he might be the first person we've ever talked about on awesome movie year, who has an asteroid named after him, the 4864 Nimoy.
Good for him. I bet a lot of those Star Trek people have celestial bodies named after them.
You're probably right. What I learned from the research on Nimoy, obviously we know, his most famous work is as Spock, and of course, I think as growing up, like he was always doing photography or singing or doing, just really pushing himself in all these places as an author, whatever. But I didn't know what a prolific stage actor he was. We talked about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest last year, and he played McMurphy in that. He played Sherlock Holmes. He was in Fiddler on the Roof and Equus. Of the movies that you were talking about that he directed, I do think we all have to watch Holy Matrimony, which stars Patricia Arquette and a child actor of Joseph Gordon-Levitt. The film tells the story of a beautiful thief hiding in a small, isolated Hutterite community who marries a young boy in order to retrieve a hidden fortune following the death of her boyfriend, who is also the older brother of the current husband, aka the young boy.
And it's a comedy.
Yeah, it just sounds so misguided. I want to watch it.
Yeah, maybe that. I was going to say, maybe that ended his career, but that was not the last. He went on to direct at least one more movie after that, so that didn't end his career.
I just want to know how they set up the logic of yeah, you could marry this 14-year-old kid,
right, and not make it seem like she's a creep or I don't know. I would be baffled as to how that movie even works.
Yes, I don't know. James Orr and Jim Cruickshank, who I'm probably mispronouncing, they had a great career as writing partners. James, I marked down Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit, as one of the projects of theirs that I have seen. And a young Lauryn Hill is in that film, Josh. But James also directed films including Man of the House with Chevy Chase and Mr. Destiny with James Belushi.
Okay. Yeah, interestingly, Emil Ardolino, who directed Three Men and a Little Lady, the director of the first Sister Act movie.
It was like a trade, a baseball trade.
Yeah.
So, Tom Selleck, Josh, tell me about these Jesse Stone movies, because they are huge, man. This guy is Johnny Television, Magnum PI, Blue Bloods, obviously Friends as Monica's love interest. I mean, sure, he's done some other movies, Mr. Baseball in and out, but these Jesse Stone movies, I don't know anything about them, and they're all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, it's a series of TV movies. I haven't seen any of these, but as you say, him and Danson both, yes, they've done some movie work, but they're just like these kings of TV. And the Jesse Stone movies are, I think they might have started on TNT, I'm not sure, but kind of like a Western lawman sort of thing. And he's done a whole series of those. Blue Bloods has been on for 15 seasons or something and just keeps going. And I remember watching him on Friends. I never saw any of this other stuff. I may have seen an episode or two of Magnum PI. I think maybe when I reviewed the remake, I went back and watched a couple old episodes, but that was never something I watched a lot of. But I mean, he's charming, certainly in any of these roles, I think.
Josh, I used to do a joke where I would say I invented a condom for men with big penises and bigger 1980s mustaches. I call them the Magnum PIs.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
It's a fun joke.
Yeah,
it's a fun quick hitter. Obviously, we mentioned Ted Danson and our love for him. I mean, maybe he picks up the mantle of Betty White as America's national treasure. I mean, dude, just again, TV empire, Cheers, where he won 2 Emmys and 2 Golden Globes as Sam Malone. Becker, where he played a totally different character. I mean, that's the thing is you think of him as this comedy actor, but you got CSI in there. Damages, he was great on that. He was good at Fargo when he was there. And of course, he's wonderful in The Good Place, Bored to Death. He's just awesome. And Curb Your Enthusiasm. He kills it in that.
Yeah, he's so good. And there's so many of those shows where he was just on, Becker was on for 6 years or more or something. And even CSI, you don't think about Ted Danson when you think of CSI, but he was on 100 episodes of CSI, in its later seasons, and some CSI spinoff. I love The Good Place. I mean, that's one of my favorite shows of all time. And I really like Bored to Death. I feel like that's an underrated show with Jason Schwartzman and Zach Galifianakis, speaking of, and Ted Danson. So yeah, he's beloved. He's wonderful. I'm sure he'll do something else great. He did a couple seasons of Mr. Mayor with Tina Fey, which was not great, but I'm sure there's some other wonderful vehicle for him coming up.
And all these, like I said, they're so different. Like he's so good as Arthur Frobisher on Damages. And then you look at Curb Your Enthusiasm and it's basically like, how do I elevate the scene with Larry David by staying grounded so he can hide, it just kills it.
Yeah, he's incredibly talented. And I think at one time, Cheers was so huge that people thought, he's never going to transcend that, which was the case, I think, for some of his co-stars on that show. But he really did that. He really succeeded at, having this really multifaceted career.
I agree. Steve Guttenberg in a lot of classic films, Diner, Cocoon. I like Home for the Holidays as a Thanksgiving movie. You got Short Circuit, and Josh, he's great in Party Down, that episode in season 2.
That is a classic episode of Party Down, and yeah, this was kind of the height of his big '80s career. He had done 4 Police Academy movies before this, and did not. He left the franchise after that, and the Short Circuit and the Cocoon movies. And his career kind of dwindled later on. He does do some good TV guest spots. Like you said, that Party Down episode is classic. And I think he was on a fun episode of Community. But he's in tons and tons of like awful like B-movie stuff these days, including one of the Sharknadoes. So I'm sure, he gets paid and he's working steadily, but he never really recaptured this level of stardom.
He played King Jasper in The Little Mermaid this time out, and he's in a new show called Paper Empire, which I couldn't find much of anything about.
I don't know that. And I'm pretty sure that Little Mermaid is not the big Disney remake. It's some straight to video ripoff.
Oh, it's not I thought it was the new one.
Oh, but, definitely not. I don't think so.
Yeah. All right. Well, look that up just to still, hey, we always welcome the presence of Steve Guttenberg.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying he's bad, but I just think that that's kind of his career has gone in that smaller direction, where Tom Selleck and Ted Danson are really, they're still pretty big stars, but Guttenberg is more like, hey, he's the guy that we can get for a decent price for our low budget film. Kind of thing.
Listen, you will not speak ill of the man who played the father in It Takes Two with the Olsen twins.
That Little Mermaid was distributed by the Asylum.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
That's a ripoff of the new Disney movie.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I'm glad we got to the bottom of that.
That is the level that he's working at now. And again, I'm sure he got paid for that, and I'm sure he's living comfortably. So good for
Nancy Travis. She was a love interest on Becker. We mentioned So I Married an Axe Murderer, and she was on the Kaminsky Method, big Netflix show. And now she's on a show called Ride, where she's like the matriarch of a rodeo family.
Yeah, that's on the Hallmark Channel. So she's had a long, good career.
How can that be on the Hallmark Channel if it's not about Christmas?
They do have non-Christmas programming as well.
I don't buy it.
But yeah, she's a very like dependable star, who shows up in that kind of stuff and generally does a good job. It's just I'm not sure why they decided to have her do this British accent that really, especially in the second movie, you really realize how not good at it she is, unfortunately.
I don't think it's a good fit either. I agree with that. Josh, I mentioned Marvin Hamlish. He's one of 2 people who has a PGOT, which is like an EGOT, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony, but he's also got a Pulitzer, PGOT.
Good for him. I wasn't sure if that was a Pulitzer or a Peabody that was the P there, but
maybe it is.
It could be. I don't know what he would win a Pulitzer for.
Maybe it's a Peabody. Let's go with that.
Either way, very talented guy. Not his best work here.
I think The Sting, right? The Sting, The Way We Were, Ordinary People. But I think it's probably The Sting is my favorite of his stuff.
Yeah, that's I'll take your word for that. So we got to talk about The Ghost, right? This dumber.
Oh yeah. Yes, I have mentioned this in our interview with James. So basically, it's very jarring. You see 2 characters. Is it Ted Danson and the mom who's walking?
Yeah, it's his character's mom.
Right. So they're just walking in the apartment, and then in the background, you see this open door of like a bathroom, and there's a figure there, and it's like it looks like it's staring at you, and it looks like this young boy. And the rumor was that this kid shot himself with a rifle, which you also, I guess, see at some point in time. And it's the ghost watching the filming of Three Men and a Baby after he killed himself. He came back to watch the filming of this in his apartment.
And what it really is like a cardboard stand-up of Ted Danson's character that you see in other scenes. And I don't know, maybe because I already knew that, like when I was watching it this time, it was very clearly that. It did not at all look like a ghost in any way. And I think part of it was that people were watching this on like lower quality VHS tapes. And if you see it now on, high definition streaming, it's very clear. But to me, it wasn't like, oh, wait, what is that? Oh, I know what it is. It was not even something that I would have thought of if I hadn't known about this urban legend.
Yeah. Josh, it's interesting because like we've gone over like the major characters here, but we haven't even mentioned like Celeste Holm, who plays Nancy Travis's mom. She has an Oscar, and she's been in movies like All About Eve. So like, they have you mentioned a lot of these kind of character actors, Philip Bosco and Paul Guilfoyle, and I had mentioned Hinman, like Cynthia Harris. There's a lot of people who just were like real, great utility players in this thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure they all got great residuals too, because this movie, after its box office success, was also, I'm sure, on like, TNT and USA
Why wouldn't it
for
be?
20 years.
I agree.
So that is Three Men and a Baby, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out on social media and online.
You can either check us out on your own, or if you have a little baby who wants to check us out with the baby. That's cool. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year, Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on whatever we're calling that platform
X.
now.
We're on X.
Yeah. We probably need a Threads at this point. And then Josh, I'm still Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. Eat This Comedy is still a thing. Go for Jason. Why aren't you guys following? I bring all that heat on Letterboxd.
He does indeed. Some old stuff is from me at joshbellhateseverything.com, and newer material there on Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter or X or whatever, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd. And you can check out our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and check out that Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where along with the extended James Orr interview, we just posted 2 bonus episodes of Awesome Movie Year, and I have a totally exclusive soundtrack album I'll be posting next week. So check that out too.
Is it a soundtrack to anything, or?
It's a soundtrack to a film.
Oh.
It's the soundtrack to Three Men and a Baby, weirdly enough.
Yeah. Dave remade all the Marvin Hamlish songs. So it's a cover album of Marvin Hamlish's soundtrack.
So thanks again to James Orr for taking time to chat with Jason. And you can check out that full interview at the Patreon, as well as our recent bonus episodes on Barry Lyndon and Nashville. And what do we have in our next episode, Jason?
Josh, it's more 80s horrific fun because it's our first feature. It's called Adventures in Babysitting, and it's by one of the icons of the 80s and really the 90s too, I'd say. Christopher Columbus, not the explorer, but the cinematic explorer of wonderful family fare.
I will take issue with your characterization of Chris Columbus as an icon. Tune in next.
You're going to say he's not an icon? All right, we'll get
to it. Tune in next time for that argument on Adventures in Babysitting. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.